Hello, John.
Hello, Oliver.
And today we're going to talk about transport and how transport is affected by pandemics, so the recent coronavirus, etc. And how over the last 300 years we've had 10 different pandemics. I'm going to list them out in a second. But yet, governments have no plan. Even though we're all interconnected globally, there still is no Irish plan on a national level, and there's no international plan for how countries can make sure the global supply chain keeps going through transport, etc. So anyway, the 10 pandemics we've had the HIV, 36 million people are dead since the early 80s. The Hong Kong flu, 1968. The Asian flu, 1956.
How many died from the Hong Kong flu?
I don't have the figures on me.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Spanish flu, 1918. They're all in the millions. So the minimum probably be about 800,000, I think. The sixth cholera pandemic, 1910 to 1911. The Russian flu, 1889. Cholera pandemic, 1852. The Black Death, 1346. The plague of Justinian, 541 to 542. And Tunine plague, which was 165 AD. So we're going back a bit there. But you can see that we've had pandemics for 300 years.
Another item that you didn't mention there, Oliver, about pandemics, there was a potato blight which caused a famine in this country where
there's a big one.
A million people died. Now, when I say they died, that's putting it in a very simple way. They were buried in mass graves. Mm-hmm. They were on the side of the street. The saddest and most awful sight imaginable. People seem to be afraid to talk about it, but it happened. And aside from that happening, the millions that emigrated and died by the time they reached Canada or the US, they were so affected by this disease, this potato blight that affected so many, and not just in this country, in other countries as well, by the way, which we don't hear about, but we know we suffer very badly here from it. So that was that was a virus of some kind, because it affected potatoes, which was the staple diet of the poor unfortunate Irish. They were living on subsistence things with the rule of this Parliament in Britain that calls itself the mother of parliaments and boasts about its own nonsense when it was responsible for this country and the tragedy that occurred in 1845, and not just in 1845, in subsequent years as well. 1879, when the apparition happened, I think it was 1879, when the apparition happened in Knock, they were starving. There's going to be a programme about that sometime later in March on EWTN about the business of Knock and about there was evictions. So what I'm saying is that is something more to our country, aside from, and maybe this happened in other countries, this potato blight, that people starved to death.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were talking about the Spanish flu, and you were saying that it shouldn't be called the Spanish flu.
It should never be called the Spanish flu. I know the Spanish themselves call it something else. But the Western society calls it that, and they have a terrible cheat because it was caused by them in the First World War, and because of the fact there was a war, which I said before in the previous video, they didn't want to make it public because it might alert the Germans who were fighting with them. But they were affected by it as well, so they did nothing for their citizens, and a lot of citizens died. Millions died because of their neglect. And Spain was the only country which was neutral in the First World War, and it was brought in by people that was already infected, that had infected ships and all the rest of it. And so it was brought into Spain, not by the Spanish. It didn't originate there. It originated in the trenches in the First World War, where they were where they were staying for years in terrible conditions. I don't know how the poor devils survived, and they were full of all sorts of diseases. And as a matter of fact, it showed that soldiers and people that were supposed to be called up, there were so many of them now in hospitals that they couldn't nearly have enough to go to the front. So it was their fault, and the least they should do now is admit it and not have anybody referring to the Spanish flu, which was a misnomer and a lie. If they couldn't get that right then, and don't forget there was no tourists that time, there wasn't any travel. It was happened the way what I'm after saying. And so nothing to do with Spain. And yet they put it on Spain. So if they did that then, are they capable of doing something still? The business of truth. So they have their agenda, and that's what I was saying about this country needing a national government, because each one has their own miserable agenda to suit themselves or whatever things that they think. Yes, so a national government that looks after the interests of the Irish people.
The modern day problem that we have, of course, is years ago, if you go back to what's called the Spanish flu, years ago, people used to travel on ships, and so it would take a long time for the actual virus, the pandemic, to spread around the world. But now, of course, we're all very, very interconnected. For example, China handles 660 million passengers, and 166 million outbound Chinese tourists. So if they have a virus in
That's
China,
an awful lot of tourists coming.
That's going to spread around the world very, very quickly.
Of course it is, and probably was a factor in the spread of it from China, because a lot of these pandemics originate in that part of the world, because it's probably because of the fact that it has such big populations. Don't forget, China has very big population, and so is India, and they're living on top of one another. They have no such thing as, a pandemic can spread there and destroy those societies, which it does. But in the West, generally speaking, they had escaped it, except of course they didn't escape this flu epidemic that killed I believe 70 million to 100 million. They don't rightly know how many was killed. It affected a third of the world's population. Can you beat that? Yeah. That's the very important factor about this flu that occurred in 1917-18. The pandemic now can be transmitted. These diseases, they call them pandemics or viruses. There's a lot of viruses that come from some source and transmit on to humans, because something happened in where cutting down the trees in these places in Brazil, and that some disease happened there too. That's caused a lot of trouble and a lot of death. So I think that the travel now, this international travel, I can't see it going back to what it was. As far as I can see, the effect of this virus and the fact that there have been so many in the past, and with millions of people killed in some of the areas where it occurred, it didn't travel because there wasn't that much travel. But now there is the travel. So these type of things could happen again, and so people are going to be aware of that, and so therefore I think that there would not be as much travelling as there was. There won't be this free movement of goods, people that the world order, Soros and all these ones wanted. I think that day is gone now, and so people won't be going as much as they were. They will be still going business and all the rest of it, but you might have as many tourists. People will stay in their own country because they'll be afraid for a few years, especially younger people. They like me won't be give it a thought, because I've already lived my life pretty all right, and I intend to live the rest of it as good as I can. I certainly don't intend to be isolated or anything like it. I intend to do a bit of travelling. But I can see that people won't be. So hotels will have to sort of rejig their situation and cater in some ways different, and depend on Irish workers. Because don't forget, Irish workers were so well trained years ago in hotel business, they were in demand worldwide.
That's it. The problem anyway with transport, as well as if you look at Ryanair now, all the planes are grounded. I was in the airport there a few days ago, and the airport was nearly empty. But so a lot of the planes are grounded, but a pandemic has the indirect advantage in that it frees up planes. So those planes could actually be put to use for something else. For example, for moving supplies if needed. maybe not this time around, maybe it's not serious enough, but we have to look at ways that we can use those planes and the pilots, okay, to move goods if we need to. For example, medical supplies. Or
That's right.
we're going to move on to food in a second, because you believe that we should be nationally sufficient. You were saying that before.
Correct, as much as you could.
So I just think when we have those planes, okay, we got to make use of them and in the best way possible. Those planes that are not up in the air flying tourists around the world.
Well, yes. Well, you see, obviously, then the pilots won't be expecting this big salaries that they were apparently going to strike for every so often. So, their situation is going to change drastically. So, if they were used for the purposes that you just outlined there, they wouldn't need all the staff that they would have on the plane to cater for passengers. So, the whole distribution system would probably need to be looked at because. It's different times altogether, so it behoves, as far as they can see, because of the supply chain that we're talking about. I think planes could be very important as regards medical supplies, particularly, not anything else that I can think of, because countries need now to be, and it's been emphasised, I think, in some of the programmes I look at, that you need to be as self-sufficient in food as you can be. The basic items that you need, which is bread, butter, sugar, tea, milk. And we were endowed with those by and large. But when I was young, most towns, even in Boyle and County Roscommon, had two bakers, Murphy's and Egan's. And it was lovely bread. But now you've got people that are only a handful doing that. That's not good. Well, where's their raw materials coming from? They used to be grown here, but is it grown here now? Are they good? Are they making their bread? Are they importing some of the ingredients? I shouldn't be surprised if they are. So all this is going to be looked at, and this is the danger with making it impossible for family businesses to thrive, because they're the backbone. You would have had the supply chain that we're talking about that's no longer there. We're not producing enough fruit and veg for our own needs. We're importing a lot of it because that's why it's so cheap. Yeah. So it's going to be expensive. I noticed in France, when I visited France, their fruit and veg was quite dear because they don't have this imports. Their local producers are producing it, and so in the supermarkets you won't get it at the price you get here. As a matter of fact, it'd be about say it's £1 here, it'd be £4 over there because the farmers have to get a price. And
or at least it's fresh.
Correct, and it's some produced, and I often notice that they have kind of clay on them. They're not all this homogenised and all the rest
Washed
of it.
In the washing machine.
You want vegetables to do a little bit of work. That's the way they were years ago, and none of us were still here. At least we had food, proper food, homegrown food. And don't forget, a lot of people that had gardens grew their own fruit and veg. We even had our own cabbages, peas, carrots, and potatoes, and all the rest of it. How many now are growing potatoes? I think a lot of our potatoes are imported from Cyprus and these places.
We covered the sugar beet factories all gone.
Well, you see, they should have never been gone because we had 4 factories, but at least we had 3 then, and they were producing the sugar. And then with the EU dictates they closed this, so the EU was clueless, to my way of thinking, and they should have never been closed. They should have looked for an exoneration, or whatever you call it. But if the EU said close this and close that, okay, like how can you jump? So they closed all these, and here now we're importing sugar. Yeah. That's not good. Supposing that dries up, what are you going to do? Because during the war, by the way, you couldn't get proper tea and sugar. I forget what we were using for sugar or using for stuff, but it was desperate. Yeah. And there was rationing.
The other thing, of course,
we're not used to that here now, and they're not speaking about it. There was rationing when I was young.
I mean,
And the glimmer man, you couldn't have your gas on. He'd come around and you could get no gas. He'd be called the glimmer man.
The glimmer man.
Yeah, because you only had to have a glimmer on your gas. You couldn't use that because it was raw material imported, coal that needed to be used for that. Now to ban coal, this world had to ban coal, and which is it's the safest blinking and the most beneficial for the environment for to be burning, and yet they made out these experts that it was a dead opposite, quite the reverse, according to other scientists. So we've got to sort of rejig what we're doing, and not be sort of putting your eggs into this basket that the EU is yapping about. Here we are now. How are we going to do if we haven't got this fruit and veg now imported? Because you mentioned there earlier that somebody ordered, I'd say, €100 worth of goods, and they got €50 worth.
That's right.
That's not much good.
Yeah, see, this is the problem, and this is why you end up with people hoarding and buying 20 toilet rolls when they only need one. The problem is people don't have confidence in the supply chain, and that comes down to transport and a whole load of other things, right? But people don't have confidence in the supply chain. They don't have confidence in the government that they're going to have food for their table for the children tomorrow, and that's why you end up with people closing.
I think the important point you mentioned there, they don't have confidence in government. Yeah. That's why I mentioned a national government in this country and perhaps in other countries. This party politics is a thing of the past. People need to come together the same as families need to come together. Locals are coming together in their own way. Take a leaf out of the people's book, for goodness sake, and stop your own stupid, ridiculous agendas and just get on with it and come together nationally, and not just Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin. Have some members from all sectors involved and working together. Surely to God they can do that and solve the problems of the country, the homeless that we're talking about, the people that have problems, psychiatric problems, drug problems. They should have never closed all those hospitals that provided psychiatric services for these people. They're not able to cope themselves.
That's right, yeah. Well, one of the reasons, of course, as well, is there's huge demand in supermarkets is for food. Is that a lot of people who ate in restaurants every day, all the restaurants are closed now, right? And so they have to go to these people that ate.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're quite right, because the hotels are closed, the restaurants,
they're all closed.
Pubs are closed, and I see a pub in Oldcastle that's closed. It has a half license, and that's open. Yeah. So they're going in drinking at home, and they say, by the way, Catholic should watch what they drink and what they eat. It should be in moderation, and it should always be done in the image of God. In other words, you shouldn't overeat and overdrink. You should do it in conformity with what the natural law is. It's not excess, and we've got excess beyond the beyonds that people have indulged in this country and perhaps in other countries, but particularly in this country. The poor young people are so deluded that they've lost whatever Christian faith that their parents and grandparents had and their great-grandparents. Here they are now, so they're clueless, and suddenly they're stuck at home. The only thing that could save them would be some prayers and stuff like that. Have some belief in something. If you're dependent on the world, the flesh and the devil, you can forget about it. It won't work. But that's why I'm emphatic about the fact that this country, and not just this country but others, need a national government in an emergency situation.
We do, yeah. We were talking about buses and trains, and these are all bottlenecks where people travel. So we need a redesign of the trains, or not maybe so much a redesign of the trains and the buses, but we do need to insist on certain hygiene practices, probably in a pandemic situation.
Well, yes, and but you see now the people are advised to stay at home, and as I was saying initially, to be fined €200 if they're outdoors. So if you went out twice, it could be €400 in your pocket.
They'll stay indoors then.
You will.
Huh?
And supposing you're up in a height and so you can't step out for a walk, otherwise you'll meet your maker before you know where you are to step out. So they're not all living in nice houses with gardens where they can perhaps sit out if the weather is sunny and perhaps get a bit of a colour. Or something like that, and have a look at nature and maybe hear the birds whistling in the trees. I don't think they're affected by the pandemic. They're going about whistling still. And I noticed when I live at home now in Oldcastle, because they're kind of queuing up there a bit and whistling. And so I have to throw them out when I have my porridge. I have to leave some for them and so on and so forth. So I noticed sometimes I go out and hear them, one or two of them whistling. They're sort of saying, God, you put something out. You see where I'm coming from?
Absolutely.
So they're not suffering. So they're flying about happy as Larry, and here we are supposed to be stuck in the house.
There you go. I wish I had wings. Right, thank you, John.
Thank you.